Hi, Trisha. I wanted to help you out a little bit with finding sources for your senior seminar paper. And I know that the instructors who teach senior seminar often emphasize having recent sources, and that can be a problem because most recent sources build upon older sources. So, a good database to use, and I'm not sure if you use databases or if you use Google to find your sources. I was a little concerned by your bibliography, or some of the good sources to use, I should say, are in the library databases. So I'm going from the library homepage, as you can see here, to look for the sources we hold at the library, such as Literary Reference Center. You need to be signed in to the library from off campus to use this. So I'm just going to try Little Women. Look at articles that might be here. And as you can see, some recent work on Little Women comes up. Often the sources that are not peer-reviewed won't really count in your bibliography. And a peer-reviewed source is one that usually comes from an academic journal, such as college literature, as you see right here. This is an article that might be useful for your work because it addresses gender and class, which means it's looking from a feminist Marxist lens at Little Women. And if you go through the Literary Resource Center, you can access these essays directly. This is from the Journal of Popular Film and Television, connecting the sitcom Facts of Life to Little Women. This essay about marriage in children's literature is actually fairly recent, and I'm not sure how easy it is to get to. Hornbook Magazine is probably not a peer-reviewed source, and I think you can, yes, you can select peer-reviewed here to make sure that the sources you are looking at are the kind of sources that senior seminar usually requires. So this is about contemporary adaptations. Hopefully, let's see how easy this is to access. Okay, it looks like we can access that. Browsing through these articles will give you an idea about the conversation surrounding Little Women. And there are several that look at adaptations. This journal, Women's Studies, is probably a good starting point. And I'm just browsing through this for the first time, so bear with me. Now, a lot of the topics, this looks like an entire special edition from this journal, Women's Studies, that's about Little Women. And I'm scrolling down so we can find a little bit more. This ATQ is American Transcendental Quarterly, also a good source. And I'm going to look at this because although it's a little older and we have this arbitrary and I think kind of silly rule about the recentness of your sources, what you will see in this is that the author sets up the argument by reviewing the commonly held beliefs about Little Women. And so Joe is apparently reading another story. Um, let's see. Alcott's choice of role model ultimately results in one of the most memorable rejections in all of children's literature. Joe refuses Laurie's proposal, and apparently this happens in another book that Joe is actually reading in within Little Women. So this is about her love interests that do come up in the most recent adaptation. And let's see. Alcott didn't have romantic feelings toward Laurie, apparently, so this is getting a little bit biographical. Martha Saxton is a scholar who shaped, and I see her name right here, who shaped the studies of Alcott, so it's helpful to kind of have background information about critics such as Elizabeth Kaiser and Margaret Saxon and Sarah Elbert. These are all scholars of Alcott whose work is pretty foundational, and you will see how what literary critics do is build on the foundational arguments of feminist critics like Kaiser and Saxon to ask new questions and to look into other ways of understanding and interpreting Little Women. So, what I'm going to do next, hold tight, is just kind of jump ahead to the works cited in this article. So, this has notes, which is interesting. So, Alcott scholars through the last century, Edna Cheney, Marjorie Worthington. This is really going way back in time. Let's see. Sarah Elbert. And I think she'll go on to mention what she's saying about Martha Saxon and some of the more recent scholars. Elizabeth Kaiser in Whispers in the Dark. And here we go. Nina Auerbach is another important fundamental critic of the women transcendentalists. Let's see. Edna Dow Cheney. This biographer is from from her lifetime. There are more recent biographies, so you don't need to go quite that far back. Sarah Elbert, worth taking a quick look at. Elizabeth Kaiser's Whisper is in the Dark is probably an important foundational kind of literary biography of Alcott. And this work cited goes back really far, simply because it's looking back into more historically contextual sources to understand the best possible story of how Alcott really felt about her romantic life. So it's a kind of literary biography move. And you don't need to look at the really old sources, but Martha Saxon and her biography is a source that you want to have a peek at as well. So make sure you look at this particular article, Martha Saxon and her biography of Alcott, Elizabeth Kaiser in her Whispers in the Dark. Possibly Sarah Elbert and Nina, where did she go? Nina Auerbach. Also probably something to look at to get a basic understanding of feminist criticism, and there's kind of a foundation and a basis of studies of Alcott that entire section in the Women's Studies Journal special edition that was all those sources previous to this one we're using. So if you start from the foundation of the basic professional modern language association feminist literary critic understanding of Alcott and compare it with different ways that critics have more recently looked at marriage and romance in Alcott's work, then you'll have a more focused and nuanced and more scholarly approach to Alcott. I'll grab the citation for this. And we have to use MLA. And I will add this to your paper comments that I was making, even though, you see, I use track changes to try to focus, and what I was trying to do was focus and get to the point of your paper. You kind of seem to not know exactly where you're going and how you're supposed to engage the literary criticism, and that's in large part because your sources aren't literary critical sources. So I stopped reading, and I'm sure that your readings here, your particular looks at the quotes from Little Women will work just fine, but what you have to do first is set up your what we call a literature review, where we really take into account what previous scholars have said about Little Women. So I'll put this in here even though it's not in alphabetical order. Bear with me. And if you go to this particular article, read this article, and then look back at those important foundations, Auerbach, Saxon, and maybe Albert, then you'll understand what this literary criticism about Alcott really does. You can also then use some of the sources from the Women's Studies special edition that we found in the Literature Reference Center. And this is from Women's Studies, June 2019. There are several articles in here that I think you'll find interesting and useful as models of how we talk about Little Women, cross-gender friendship, etc. And I think you probably want to focus on marital choices in Little Women. And Alcott, of course, never married. So what does it mean that she never married and that Jo refused the supposed romance of her first offer? And those questions, of course, operate in the adaptations of Little Women as well. You put it in your paper, and I changed it as she robs herself of love. But when you look at the sources, she might have actually been romantically attracted to the Polish guy. She might not have had romantic feelings toward the man who first offered her marriage and who eventually married her sister. So kind of thinking very much about what Alcott's view of marriage is important. And something to keep in mind is that in Alcott's lifetime, marriage most frequently happened as an arrangement to properly pass on property. Marriage wasn't a romantic, you fall in love, you get engaged, and you have butterflies kind of institution. Marriage was a contract. Marriage was a way to pass on property. Marriage really didn't have anything to do with how we think of it now in terms of love and romance. that was a new concept for Alcott. So she struggled as a woman who had aspirations to try to fit this new free love version of marriage as an egalitarian love match in a society that still viewed marriage as a contract and just a way of kind of taking care of women and controlling them and making sure that the right people inherited property. I think you'll understand a little bit more of this when you look at some scholarly sources. So if you can, as I said, look at the article that I put the citation for. I'll see if I can download it for you. And you should also be able to find Auerbach, Saxon, and Albert in the library. That will help you focus and reorient what I think you're trying to ask about Alcott's view of marriage. Hopefully that will help.